Welcome to the TEDx stage, Ben Nelson.
Thank you all. So we're going to do a little bit of an experiment. And the experiment is I want your brain processes on, because I'm going to pose a question to all of you. It's a very long question, so it's got a lot of parts to it. But the short gist of it is I'm going to describe an industry. And for the purpose of this exercise, I want everybody here to forget that we're talking about education. Okay? We're doing a mind shift now. So I'm going to ask you a question after I describe this industry, and the question is this a good industry within which to start a new company? Okay, so it's a very simple question, very long setup. So here are the industry characteristics. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry providing a service that's doing gross margins of about 80% or so. There are a couple of dozen competitors in this industry. The most recent entrant of which will turn 100 years old next year. Okay? The industry provides a service that has grown in price 3 times the rate of inflation for 30 years. And so the service has become substantially more expensive. And for the privilege of buying that service, this industry serves approximately 10% of market demand. Okay? So another 10% of market demand, approximately, is serviced by people outside of that industry in substitute goods, and about 80% they don't get to participate. Right? They just can't buy it. Even though they have the means and the ability to take advantage of the service, they just are not really allowed to participate. Okay? Now, the last characteristic of this industry is that the service that is delivered by service professionals who not only have no training in actually how to deliver the service, but in their course of their evaluation, promotion, compensation, etc., not only are not monitored in how they deliver the service, they're not trained in how to deliver the service, but there's absolutely little to no, and mostly no, penalty or reward for providing this service well. Now, before I ask you the question, and a show of hands would be good, I do want to say that one soft characteristic of this service. This industry produces a product that is not only critical for U.S. national security, but is also critical for global prosperity. So given those of you here that are entrepreneurs or not, how many of you think that this sounds like, without knowing what industry this is, as obviously none of you do, how many of you think that this sounds like industry characteristics that invite new entrants? A few of you. Okay. Anybody who vehemently opposes the concept? Okay, good. And so this idea, if you haven't been able to guess, is the segment of higher education which is called elite higher education. It is the very top. It is the segment for which most people say, well, when you look at higher education, you really want to expand to people who don't get in and really get to broaden the size of the pyramid. The top is fine. They've got a great brand. They'll do well. But what I described is what happens in the elite space today. And so let's think about what a university would look like as a new entrant without the encumbrance of the beautiful fields in sunny New Haven and the sports teams and the research facilities and the one-upsmanship. How would you rethink what the world's greatest education should look like? So first, let's think about access. So today, Harvard University has stated publicly that 85% of its applicants, 85%, are fully qualified to go to Harvard. Harvard does not have an 85% acceptance rate, which may shock some of you. It's substantially lower than that. And so why is that? Well, it is because bringing in an incremental student hurts universities in many, many ways. It hurts their prestige, right? Because the more students they reject, the more selective they are. It hurts their rankings, which nobody pays attention to. By the way, U.S. News and World Report, no one cares about U.S. News and World Report. Just so happens that by accident, all universities at the top optimize to each one of those measures. I don't know why, but the stars are aligned that way. And if you add more students, you have to add more lab space, facilities, researchers, faculty. It gets to be very expensive. And so you could imagine an access paradigm which actually looks at just the potential of the students to be the leaders of the world, the future leaders of the world, and not take into account what kind of a great arm they have for various sports, not who mommy and daddy are and how much money they're willing to pay in order to make sure that junior gets that kind of branding, and not, frankly, to think about whether or not they come from a state that happens to not have had too many applicants that year and they want to show great coverage. Right? Really just think about where that student comes from, and most importantly, where that student comes from should be geographically independent. And so the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of qualified students that happened to not have the fortune of being born in the United States or become a naturalized resident or citizen, who are largely shut out of our undergraduate education in elite institutions, should have the opportunity to be educated in a way that Western democracy would want to see the world's leaders thinking in the future. So that's about access. When it's affordability. Well, if you think about affordability, $40,000 a year for tuition produces some very high gross margins, which means if you just look at the cost of instruction versus the cost of what you pay for, there's actually quite a bit of room. And if you bring that cost down, you can bring it down by 75%, still be a profitable model at scale, and at the same time make it accessible to the global middle class. The global middle class, by the way, numbers about 1.5 billion people today. It'll rise to 4 billion in 2032. Right? That's a bit of a problem that needs to be addressed. Third is the concept of instruction. Now, I'm going to take another poll here, assuming that some of you have an undergraduate education or have taken one. And so what I want to know is, did you get your money's worth for the product that you bought, for the service that you bought? And in business, some of you may know this concept of a net promoter score, right? That means how many of you would say, hey, the product that I bought is really great, and you subtract the people who say, yay, not so great, and you see what that is. You know, a good net promoter score is that people who promote versus subtract are basically 50% more, so 70% promote, 20% subtract. That's a great business. The opposite, not so good. So imagine that now we're evaluating your courses, not the great times you had in college, the people you met, the parties, but actually the classroom experience. Because what these classes are supposed to do, they're supposed to change your lives. You're supposed to come in as 18-year-olds having studied algebra and US history and graduate as analytical, leading, thinking machines. So, let's have this following survey. How many of you would say that more than 50% or more of your classes changed your lives? That going in and out of that class, 50%, now remember, just math for those of you who may be mathematically challenged, 50% means more than half. Of these classes, you walked into class, and by the time you went back out, the way you looked at the world radically changed. How many of you have 50% higher? Okay, our net promoters. Okay, about 10 of you. Now, how many of you were to say, you know what, well, it wasn't 50%, but it was a large minority, let's say 25 to 50%, right? So I came in, and if I took 40 courses, at least 10 of them, but probably close to 18, 19, they really, my God, they just changed my life. You are the non-detractors. How many of you is that? Okay, another 15 or so. So now, how many of you would be the detractors? How many would you say, you know what, quarter at best, and probably close to zero as far as the ones, Econ 101, we should explain to you the laws of how money works, Psych 101, all those, changed your lives. How many of you would actually be at that low end of the scale? Wow. So we're at a pretty negative net promoter score. That does not bode well for a business. And in the world of technological disruption, the world of the internet, where instruction and learning really can be disaggregated from place, there is no excuse for that kind of experience. And in fact, not only should every single course, 100%, be revelatory and be life-changing, the curriculum around them needs to be rethought to actually train people to lead, to create, not just to practice. And lastly, the whole concept of a classroom needs to be revised. Too many people today say classrooms are the old way of doing things, and now we need to learn separately, so we'll learn one-on-one personally. Very few people are saying, you know what, that's all great, but why are we giving up on the classroom? Classrooms are actually incredibly rich places to grow, to debate, to learn. But let's rethink what a classroom should look like when everybody is connected, when everything is tracked. Rather than just have adaptive learning, how do we adapt the entire classroom experience to maximize what everybody gets out of it while still preserving the dynamic of live debate? So that's the instruction piece. And lastly, it's outcome. Today, there is an unfortunate view that the elites do not train leaders. That view comes from famous dropouts, famous unschoolers, famous folks who look at measurement of admits to the great universities and track their progress, whether or not they accepted and went to them or went to state school, and find that, frankly, there's not much of a difference. But the fact of the matter is that if we believe that, right, if we believe that, you know what, really all of these schools are just branding exercises, that means that if we look at 18-year-olds across the country, we should be willing to put them in the workforce and say, you know what, take care of it, you know everything you need to know, right? Sure, go work for 4 years, mature, because maybe those 4 years are important maturationally, but your mind, it doesn't actually need to be pushed, challenged, programmed. It doesn't actually need to bring you to a point where you learn how to create, where you learn how to actually move this world forward. I can't accept that. I reject that out of hand. Maybe it's because I was a high school senior at one point, but God knows that me nor anybody I knew at that age, with no exception, was ready to tackle the great problems in the world. And so, a reimagined university, a rethought university that focuses on creating the world's future leaders, will find a way, and those ways exist, to actually formally prepare and launch students into the areas that they are most passionate about and help them create and move the world forward. Those beliefs, that reimagining, is what I am committed to do, and is why I set up Minerva, which I believe will be the world's future elite university. My hope is that Minerva and other institutions like it will change the conversation we had today from should we opt out, should we not, should we look and exclude versus accept and promote the few, to changing the conversation to what can we do? How do we collectively move the world forward and make sure that the people with the greatest potential are given the greatest push by us collectively in society for our better good? Thank you for your time.